Hi, Matt.
Hey, great to see you, Graham.
Good to see you. Welcome, everyone, to Crazy in Love, the podcast where two therapists explore everything about modern relationships. Tonight, Matt, we're exploring quite a modern phenomenon, aren't we?
Mm,
Something called the 3 hour evening. A
mm.
proposal by, I think it was a TikTok influencer. I'm not sure much about her background, but her name was Rachel Higgins, I believe. She put together this idea that a couple, and particularly her and her husband,
Yeah,
spend 3 hours together each evening, and
yeah,
that would enable them to dedicate themselves to their romantic relationship in the context of having, I think they had a 4 or 5 year old daughter. So they put their daughter to bed about 7 o'clock. The
yeah.
idea would be that they'd have 3 hours or so after that to spend time together. We'll talk in a moment about how to segment those different hours apart and how useful they are. But I'm interested to some degree in why we think that has caught on as an idea. It kind of has caught the zeitgeist a bit, hasn't it, and got a lot
Yeah,
of interest. Whereas it seems like quite a simple, obvious idea to some degree. Why do you
yeah.
think it's kind of caught fire?
I don't know. I mean, simple ideas are always attractive, aren't they? I
Yeah.
can't remember the H.L. Mencken quote, which is for every problem, there's a simple idea which is completely wrong. Something like that. I've mangled it, but it's one of those,
Such a
isn't it? I
simple
think where
quote.
it's a very pleasingly simple idea
Yes.
in response to a thing that a lot of people find challenging. So that bit where we don't quite know how to make use of our time in the evening and it ends up being beset by chores or childcare, or we are finding ourselves never with any time together. I think is a common problem for people who are in the rush hour of their lives.
I
So it gets
wondered if it
off of
was.
simplicity, doesn't it?
Yeah, I agree with that. I wondered if an additional element was that it spoke to some sense of disappointment and dissatisfaction in relationships, that people are, even when they're not busy, that they might spend an awful lot of time just scrolling on their phones next to each other. And I think she specifically almost was targeting that idea that we get so exhausted that we put our daughter to bed, then we're cooking, then we're tidying up. We've had busy work days, then we just flob on the sofa, we get our
Yeah,
phones out and we don't speak to each other, and then we wake up the next morning and we go again. And there's a dissatisfaction in there that she was trying to push against. And I think that does resonate with a lot of people, this idea that I'm
yeah,
sharing a house with someone that, to be honest, all we do is lay on a sofa, watch Netflix, scroll our phones, and then we're not actually
yeah.
connected much at all in the evenings.
It's sort of like hacks generally, isn't it? They're pretty popular on socials. You know, the idea that you do things in the morning, there's a routine. Like people are very interested in one another's morning routine, for
Yeah.
example. There's a big bit of socials that is devoted to that and hacking and productivity. I suppose it feels like a productivity hack to some extent, as well as the answer to a real problem. I've got the quote. I've got to try and get it right.
The Mencken quote. Go on.
It's such a bad mangled job. For every complex problem, there is an answer that is clear, simple, and wrong. And
Mm,
I don't think this is entirely wrong. I think it
no, agreed.
depends how you utilize it, doesn't it? The idea that you would have some time for you and you alone, some
Well,
time to
let's before you go into it, let's tease out those 3 hours, yeah, because
yeah,
that's what she specifically says. There's three distinct hours that her and her husband tried to carve out. What were
yeah.
they?
I mean, tell me if you see these the same, but broadly, you would spend, I don't know whether she's prescriptive about the order of these things, but you would spend the first hour or so doing the tasks and doing the chores. So
Yep.
dinner, kids to bed, that kind of thing. Pack lunches tomorrow if you've got kids in your life. You know, listeners can tell I have. Whatever needs doing, and then the second hour is typically for the couple. So
Yep.
you'll be talking to one another, perhaps over food. Doesn't need to be, but you would be doing something that you enjoy to do as a couple that connects you. So I think query whether watching a Netflix show counts. Let's come back to that. And then the third hour is yours, right? So if you want to scroll or you want to send emails or you want to do whatever you want to do, you want to work out or you want to paint or craft, that's your time to do that. So broadly segmented into the chores you need to do, including the kids, and time together as a couple, which is genuine time together that you've both chosen and creates a connection between you, and then an hour or so for yourself. Is that how you would have explained it? What did
Yep.
I
Yep.
miss?
Definitely. The only thing I would add slightly to that is the hour of the couples in the middle that she suggests.
Yep.
Phones down, phones off.
Thumbs
Right.
down.
It's
Yep.
proper, whatever you do, even if it is watching a Netflix show, it's about connection. So if you're watching the Netflix show, the phones are off, you're talking about the Netflix show once it's finished, right? Rather than just heading straight back to your phones.
But the more classic examples are talking together, eating together, playing a game together, even showering
Even
together.
showering together. She specifically, I think that was the first thing she suggested, which took me aback. I was like, I'm not sure I've suggested that to many couples over the years that they should share a shower together. Maybe we should talk about how maybe that's a more common thing than we realize.
Yeah, perhaps. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So, I mean, the essence of that isn't, it isn't a terrible idea, right? That you might think about dividing the evening up in a way that gives everybody something of what they want. The house stays reasonably clean, and the admin tasks and the boring stuff of life get done. The kids are put together, having put to bed, having been well fed and bathed and storied and whatever. And then there's a bit of time for the couple, bit of time for you before you turn in for the night. So the essence of it is kind of okay, isn't it? I mean, I think you could problematize it in all sorts of ways. What was your reaction to it? It's such a sort of straightforward idea. It barely is worth considering, or do you got beef with it?
No, you can obviously pull it apart, but I don't think the rigidity of it is something that is particularly important. I think
Oh,
what she's trying to achieve with that framework, I'd broadly support, which
yeah,
is you've got various pockets of your life that need attention, and trying to transition frequently in one evening between those different pockets of your life often leads to frustration and dissatisfaction and annoyance, right? That if you're trying to put the kids to bed while you're also thinking, well, the dishes need to be sorted before we then kind of put the TV on and properly relax and the clock is ticking. I know that feeling from personal experience. If
yeah,
it prevents you from really focusing on the thing that you're doing because your mind is on the 3 or 4 other things that still need to be done that
yeah.
evening. And I
Puts you on
think
the same page, doesn't it, as well? Sorry, I might be interrupting you, but
that's
it puts you
perfect.
on the same page, which I think can be helpful. So, one of the things that came up for me recently with a couple was one of them after the meal wants to go and relax on the sofa and watch a show together and cuddle up and wants it to be cozy time for them together, and the other one has got ants in their pants and wants the dishes done, and that's that for them is relaxing, and knowing that they're not done or knowing them that we might then fall asleep and leave them overnight and do them in the morning is unrelaxing. So
Yeah.
we would have agreed this in the sort of scheme we're talking about. We would have a kind of not necessarily a rigid idea but a reasonable agreement as to how the evening was going to unfold, and there would be clarity. And what was helpful for that couple is a very minor example, was just a bit of agreement about we would do it this way, or we would try it this way, or we would alternate between those two stages, whatever works for the couple. I don't think there needs to be a prescriptive solution, but we at least know what the problem is. We've talked about it and we've had a go at proposing some solutions. And I guess what she does in proposing that sort of division of 3 activities across the evening, we know where we stand.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the counter to that is it's not very spontaneous, right?
I don't think that matters too much. I'm not sure how many couples want a huge amount of spontaneity in their evenings. I think it's more for me more about a lack of flexibility in it. That
Uh-huh.
I don't know about you, but my life is very rarely sorted by 7 o'clock at night, which then leads to 3 hours of an evening that it presents itself to you and your partner, where you can do with it as you may. It's kind of a person with one small child who sleeps well and goes to bed at 7 o'clock every night. It's a model for them, maybe, and it's a model for certain type of couples. But for the vast majority of couples that I work with, it's a deeply unrealistic framework and potentially puts way too much pressure on needing to carve out an hour for their relationship and an hour for themselves every night.
Yeah, I
I
agree.
think we
Yeah,
want to talk about tonight in this episode kind of a bit about if a couple's genuinely spending an hour a night together, that's quite a lot of time.
yeah, sure.
Imagine the vast majority of couples are spending an hour a night actually trying to connect with one another. And I
No,
think
I agree.
that although I can see some real positives now, I can see some potential pitfalls in trying to carve out an hour a night together and what that might entail.
Yeah, I agree. I thought the timings were all wrong. I mean, to be home if you're in the office, to be home at 7 is to be, leaving at a time that lots of clients I work with would not recognize as their working day having ended, or they would be coming home to do bath and bed, grab some food, and then they would be logging
When the
back.
clock's out again. Yeah.
Yeah, so we would have to factor in another 90 minutes or so of work in that scenario. But I mean, that's maybe us being a bit pedantic on the timeframes. But I mean, I think if you concertinaed it, the basic idea of having those segments isn't a terrible one. But I would agree as well, there would be a virtue in possibly even having a bit less time. You and I were talking just before we came on, weren't we, about having sort of quality conversations together as a couple, and that it could be just moments rather than a very long conversation. I hear couples say that they want to talk about the day, they want to download, offload, and they want a conversation. They want a partner to be very interested in their day. But it's like, what is it you're asking them to be interested in? Work that they don't know very much about. Quite often, people and personalities in the office who they've, quite often never met. It's we could end up in a very long conversation about your, HR problems. And I'm not sure whether pretending I'm interested in that is really strengthening the relationship or the bond between us. I might say, as the therapist in that situation, you might want to find another outlet for that conversation. Would that be
Yeah.
fair, or is that far too harsh?
No, I think it is fair in certain situations. I'm wondering what you would say to the partner who then would say, "But I want to connect with him or her." Like, what would you suggest to me if I can't talk about the HR situation at work, or I can't talk about my mate who you've never met and her romantic problems? Like, what is it that I'm supposed to talk about together?
Yeah, sure, sure. I think it's a legit challenge, isn't it? I wouldn't say that you can't talk about those things, but I think sometimes when people get into them, there's quite a funny thing on socials that goes around every once in a while where somebody begins a boring story that has no end, and you as the viewer are watching the other partner's reaction to it. And I sometimes think their conversation is like, where is this going, this very long story of which meeting room you were in, or which floor of the building you were on, or whether so and so came in and interrupted. That, I think, yeah, I don't, there's no problem if I'm interested in that and I'm finding you charming and it's some way, shape, or form helps you. But I think for most people, it doesn't. They've had their own busy day, and for a lot of people, for a lot of guys I talk to, they do not want another discussion about the day. They do not want to rerun it or relive it, the politics or the practicalities of it. And that, I think, is where the jarring is. So I think, I don't know quite what the answer is, but you would have to find a way of saying what it is about that day that was important to you,
Yeah.
what you would like to have heard and understood. Like, what is the best version of this? Like, if you were trying to tell it in as few words as possible, or in a concise way, or in a way that it connects with the other person. It's on you as well as the speaker, isn't it? It's not an opportunity to dump the worst aspects of your day on your partner and then be disappointed in them that they can't magic it away, or they don't have the right words, or they look bored or indifferent.
Yeah, and chances are they're not going to understand the complexity of it or the personalities involved in quite the way you need them to for an authentically interesting or useful response, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know whether this helps, but one of the things from my life, I'm always interested in what my wife is working on, but she will sometimes tell me what's difficult or going wrong, and it's like that isn't necessarily what I would have wanted in that situation. So we've had conversations where I said, no, tell me what you're working on, tell me what you're aiming to achieve, tell me what's the thing that sort of gets you up in the morning and is motivating about this. Like, give me, as somebody who doesn't know
Mm.
this world very well in terms of its subject matter, like, what's the benefit, if this worked out well, what would it look like? That's, I find, an interesting conversation. I'm not closed off to where the challenges are, but I'm not necessarily brought most alive by the HR aspects of it, or that recruitment is
No,
a.
but let's run with that for a moment. What do you think she would want from you if she is bringing those things to you? I think is the
Hmm.
question you're suggesting that both parties ask, isn't it? It's not the detail isn't the important thing. It's not like she just wants to dump the detail on you. She wants something to be heard or something to be responded to in
Yeah.
that, even if it's a sense of frustration or a sense of anger or a sense of
Yeah,
irritation,
yeah.
whatever it might be.
Yeah, yeah. I think we can get lost in it though too. I mean, maybe
Yeah.
this isn't quite to answer your question, but I think sometimes I can answer her because we are willing audiences for one another in relationships, aren't we, by and large? And because we try and be courteous towards one another and listen to one another, I can ramble on about a thing. And I'm like, what am I telling her this? It's not interesting. It doesn't show me in a particularly good light. I've already dealt with it, and I think there is something on me if we were using that kind of structure. Okay, so what do I want to share? And to what end? And I think at that point, it's like, I don't know, maybe this feels a bit more like work, or it feels a bit so
Mm,
structured that I've now got to think about what I'm saying. But I think
mm.
generally in a relationship, you wouldn't at the start of a relationship be bringing all your moans and groans about work to the date, the first date, the second date, the third date, or even probably 2 or 3 months in. And I often say this to couples: what drew you to your partner? How were the first dates shaping up? Even if you met at uni, what were the first conversations like? What did you do together? And it won't have been somebody whining on about their course tutor or the fact they've fallen behind with their essays or their assignments or whatever, or somebody, it will have been things that were impressive or interesting or
Yeah.
intriguing about them
Yeah,
rather
but
than.
I agree, but we also say to people that relationships change, though, right? Well, how? So what's the middle ground there? What's the sweet spot of kind of you're not going to be 21 all the time on the first date? Are you trying to hide your worst points from
I
someone?
don't think hide your worst points, but I think there is something about bringing your best to it as well.
Yeah,
There's a choice, isn't there? How was your day? Well, I could tell you about the things that went wrong or the things that were frustrating. I could tell you about the things that were successful. I could tell you an amalgam of those things. So I suppose, the answer to your question, like what's the sweet spot, is something of each. Let something of each in. But I do think there's a default to sometimes whine and complain about the day, or bring something which is heavy or difficult into those conversations that the other person really hasn't got any
well,
age
that's
over.
part of the reason why I wanted to challenge the idea of an hour together, because the hour together is likely to be at 9 o'clock at night when you're both knackered and a bit irritated and got one
Sure.
eye on the next morning. And I'm not sure that's the best time for couples to have conversations.
Right.
I personally much prefer to kind of store up the week's worth of kind of stuff and then go out to the pub or to dinner or eat at home together for a longer period of time at the weekend, and then have a proper kind of elongated conversation where you're almost saying, okay, tell me about your week. What's been going on? Let's kind of, I don't think 9:30, 10 o'clock at night is the best time always to be having those kind of conversations, and is more prone to getting a bit irritated with each other.
That's interesting. It was making me think of therapy and sort of old school therapy. Therapy, as it first was, with Freud and his descendants, would have been therapy every day of the week. It would have been reporting back on minor peeves and associations of thoughts you'd had and dreams you had and all of those things. And I think you and I would take a very different approach from that.
Yeah.
We would question whether that was ever a good idea. It never strikes us as a good idea. I could say with confidence that you don't see people anything like every day of the week. Probably don't even see people twice a week very often.
No, I'd go potentially further with some of the language you're using, in the sense that I think it can do harm as
Yeah,
well as just not being useful, in the sense that it reinforces this idea that you should take seriously your inner monologue, and you should take seriously every fluctuation in your emotional state, rather than just riding the waves every day and then kind of taking a bit of a backwards look over the week and saying, actually, what do I want to take from that? Is there anything to learn from that? Otherwise, you're just, it's signal and noise, isn't it? Seeing the wood for the
exactly.
trees.
Yeah. And I guess I don't think either of us would necessarily identify ourselves as working in a sort of solution focused tradition, but we would bring some of that in, some of
Yeah.
those insights from positive psychology, and some of like the way that you might build on change is what went well, appreciating what went well and doing more of it. So I think in a relationship, there's some onus there, isn't there? That we're not having a conversation which is, I had a very difficult day, and here is the detail of it, but some sort of some sense of what's going well as well. So I guess date night for you might lend itself to composite of those things, bit of like what's been
Yeah.
challenging and what's tripped you up, and a
Yeah.
bit what's gone okay. And
Yeah. Good.
perhaps without even thinking that through, but that more balanced approach rather than digging in
Yeah.
on the deep. Yeah.
I think the last thing I'd say on the kind of spending an hour together as a couple is, I think it, the proposal of the kind of connecting and the intensity of that, I think it underestimates the power of just chilling out and
Yeah, sure.
sharing quiet time together, which I think is
Yeah.
You can be in a room reading together in a way that kind of connects you just as much as trying to force a conversation across a dinner table when neither of you are in the mood to do so.
Yeah.
So.
And date nights could just be an activity, huh? Like so for
Yeah,
lots of people, I mean, I would say like go temping bowling, just do something that is
yeah.
pointless and frivolous and maybe, enjoyable. If it's not enjoyable to both of you, don't go temping bowling. But it's the kind of thing that might be fun. That would be an activity. It doesn't need to be a long lingering dinner. And I think that is, we've talked about this probably on the pod. We've definitely written about it, haven't we, at Psych today, that those date nights or that romantic weekend, it's like, oh, wow, that's going to feel like a lot,
Well,
that's
that's what I felt about the 1 hour, the 3 hour evening, the 1 hour in there is it just feels like it's putting a pressure, a spotlight on something that generally works better with a bit more spontaneity, a bit more flexibility. I think I'd put the same kind of challenge to the idea of spending an hour on your own, an hour focused on self-care. I think the idea of self-care is getting a lot of, understandably, a lot of focus recently. I think the idea that everyone should spend an hour focusing on themselves in a really positive way every day is potentially kind of similarly fraught with a bit of too much focus on the self sometimes. Too
definitely,
much focus on the
strong,
idea
strong
that
agree.
you matter substantially more than other people, and do you know what I mean? Rather than what I'm often working with people where that going back to solutions, the solution to some of the way they're feeling about themselves in the world is that they should reduce the focus on their own thoughts and feelings and get out into the world a little bit more. So
Yeah.
my challenge to that idea was, well, why shouldn't that be an hour kind of volunteering in your community,
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
or writing something, or
Yeah.
building something, or building something outside of yourself, or building a relationship with a child, whatever it might be, right? There's
Yeah.
something about the focus on the self, which I think is sometimes problematic. And the idea of
Yeah. It's
hour,
almost always problematic, isn't it? Really, I think that it's a well kept secret that you do something for others, and actually it pays you a kind of dividend that you just can't get by taking a bath,
right?
even taking a run. To be honest, like do
Yeah.
something of genuine use to someone else, and coaching some kids football, whatever it might be. It doesn't have to be terribly noble. Like I don't think we're talking
No.
high-minded stuff, but just and also within the family, that those things, the decluttering the house or preparing things for tomorrow, or reading a story to the child or spending time with them in a certain way, like that is, that makes one feel like I'm doing the right thing here. I can look
Yeah.
myself in the mirror and this is what I should have been doing today. This was my work, rather than I needed to get away because there were 6 more emails that needed to get sent, or I needed to scroll, or I needed to check
Yeah.
news, or whether you're looking at crap on social or whether you're reading the New Yorker or whatever you're doing, it's all some version of the same, isn't it?
And I'm just thinking about those days where I don't get time to myself, right? And I don't like a construct that says that that is in effect a failure of a day, that there's something
Yeah,
that I should feel resentful or annoyed that I haven't
yeah,
had time to invest in myself. That if I've been spending my time with my kids because they couldn't get to sleep and I've had to kind of
yeah,
go back upstairs a few times, I've had to
yeah,
clean up from dinner because we took too long cooking dinner. I shouldn't see that as a failure, I don't think, because they're things I'm invested in because I've chosen those
yeah,
directions in my life and I'm investing in them, and I need a bit of flexibility to deal with those, and
yeah.
my needs take second fiddle, and I think that that is in some ways a better life and a life well lived, rather than this idea that I should be carving out an hour every day to light some candles and read some books and have a bubble bath, right? That I just think
Yeah.
nice around the edges for me, but an hour a day, no way.
I just wanted to say something about bedtimes, because I think that's a big part of this as well. So what I come up against with couples all the time is that they don't have time to themselves because bedtimes with kids are a mess, and they go on and on and on for far longer than the couple would want. So leaving aside my opinions on that and whether I think it's a smart way to spend time, they report that they don't like it. It's exhausting. It drags on. They don't really have a reliable, repeatable system. Everyone's in a state of stress. Meal times are, compromised as a consequence of it. And often somebody just falls asleep while they're putting the kid to sleep. And that's a big recurring one for me. Genuinely lost track of the parents who fall asleep with their children at night and who can't cap that at 20 minutes or whatever it is, with a priority to make dinner for oneself or one's partner. And I think it's why I talk so much to couples about parenting, because that bit
Mm,
specifically
mm,
gets in the way. And then they can't do the other thing as well, which is they can't go out for date night because the
yeah.
kids have got such a particular routine, or they're taken to be so individual or so difficult or so much of a bloody nuisance that nobody will come and deal effectively with them. And I think that's a big it's a big blocker. It's a big blocker to relationship.
That's interesting. A lot of anxiety in that space, right? A lot of anxiety about bedtimes, but also a lot of anxiety about leaving the children with someone else as
Sure.
well.
Yeah.
That might have to be dealt with there. Might have to be what
Yeah.
dealt with. Sounds like it should be something that's solved rather than something that is more of a choice point. But you know what I mean? That
Yeah, I do. I think that's like one of the practical sort of skills-based things that we often talk about, what it could look like, what it should look like, and what
yeah,
resolve it would take to get there, because that feeds into couples' life a lot. That would be alongside work, and maybe even more so than work, the big thing that gets in the way. And I think therefore, if you can't get the sitter, we talked a little bit about date night, you can't get out on a date night. And the problem with being indoors doing these things and chatting for whatever length of time and whatever you're chatting about, whether we're right about chatting about positives or moaning on about your day at work or whatever else, you're not really getting through the shower, getting dressed up and going out with other adults. And I think you can miss that as well if you're relying on this. I'm not particularly advocating date night all the time or any particular frequency, but there is something about getting out the house as a couple of adults dressed up for yourself and for the other one, particularly when your kids are in certain sort of phases, is quite nice. And I suspect it's important for a lot of people to do that.
good. The evening's dragging on, Matt. We've got less than 3 hours before my bedtime. I'm keen to
Yeah.
carve out my various hours.
Yeah,
Anything?
you need your hours. No,
Yeah.
no, I think that will do it.
Good. All right. See you next time.
Nice to see you.
Bye.